Welcome to Excellence Talks and welcome again, John Magee, founder at contrastingcultures.com, helping global companies with cross-border collaboration. John, you are American, have studied, lived and worked in Germany for almost 30 years, and you are the most authentic bicultural person I've ever met.
Thank you, Christian. Thanks for the invitation. And that's a really great compliment. What you're saying is that, John, in all your years here in Germany, you've really worked hard to learn our language, to study our history, and to live with us as a people and sort of get to understand and how we think and how we do things. And that's about the highest compliment you can pay to me. Thank you, Christian.
And we probably know each other well enough for long enough time. I swear it's true. John, you often talk about right thinking and wrong thinking. That's a big claim to make, right? Can you give us a few examples, please?
I can. And we're talking about the intercultural space, so cross-border teams and what happens when people from different countries or different cultures are thrown together and told to collaborate and to produce great results. Let's take Germany and the USA. As you know, that's my area of expertise, but this is universal, these statements. This is true for any interaction between any cultures. The French and the Saudi Arabians, the Indians and the Chinese, the South Koreans and the Mexicans, it doesn't matter. But my experience and my expertise is in the USA-Germany space. So let's take that example. Anytime a German is taking a serious approach to understanding who the Americans are, how they think and how they work, communication, decision-making, leadership, process philosophies, product philosophies. They're doing that with German eyes. In other words, they're not abstract or floating up in the stratosphere, detached from their Germanness, looking at Americans. They're doing it as Germans. They're perceiving Americans as Germans. And it's this other way around. Anytime an American takes a serious look at who the Germans are, they're doing it with American eyes from the perspective of the American culture. So anytime colleagues and global teams are earnestly and honestly taking a focused look at where do we differ and how we think culturally and how can we better improve our collaboration, they always have to remind themselves they're doing it in a two-way conversation, as an American interacting with a German or a German interacting with an American. So it's always about them and about us at the same time. You can't understand another culture without reflecting about your own culture. And this is something new for people when they work internationally for the first time. The second point is, and I like to use the image of bell curves, or Gauss-Kurven as the Germans would call it. And you being a PhD physicist will know all about Gauss-Kurven. It's very common for people to say to me, John, you can't generalize about Americans. America is very diverse. There's the East Coast and the West Coast, there's the Midwest, there's the South, there's cities, there are rural areas. We have a very diverse ethnic population. That's the history of an immigrant country, the US. And many Germans say, John, you can't generalize about Germans. They're Bavarians and they're the Rhinelanders and they're Saxons. And we're an ancient culture compared to the US. And, we have these deep traditions. And those statements are true, but those statements are not relevant in international and cross-border collaboration. They're relevant if two German companies are merged, or they're relevant if two American companies merge, but they're not relevant when you merge two companies from two different cultures. So I use the image of the bell curve. Yes, you're going to have a distribution on the bell curve. Americans, East Coast, West Coast, young Americans, older Americans, female, male, gay, straight, people who are trained as scientists, people who are trained as historians, people who are trained as attorneys. You have all of these shades of gray within a national cultural bell curve. Germans and Americans. But that's not what we're focused on in cross-border collaboration. What we're focused on is when the bell curves are brought together. And we're interested in where they overlap or don't overlap. We're primarily interested in where the bell curves don't overlap. The third example I'd like to use is differences instead of commonalities. There are some people that are irritated with my approach. I focus on differences. I don't think teams should focus on discussing commonalities because commonalities work for collaboration. I think teams need to focus on where their differences are. Now, this can make people feel uncomfortable. We don't want to talk about differences, cultural differences. Folks, you don't have any other choice. And in fact, once you engage in this discussion, you'll find that it's liberating, it's freeing. You'll begin to discover and understand where the bottom line differences are in the approaches to your collaboration. And on that basis, you're then in a position to talk about it as adults. It actually becomes impersonal at some point because it's really about how Americans think and how Germans think, and it's not about particular individuals. So, there are differences between thinking in a right way and thinking in a wrong way. And I hope those examples were helpful.
They were, in fact, John, and that all makes a lot of sense to me. But again, stating that ways of thinking are wrong is quite self-confident. Where do you get this confidence, this certainty?
Well, maybe it's just a little bit of arrogance, Maybe I'm just an arrogant, self-confident guy.
You're not.
I've been working on this stuff for 30 years, and it's become so clear to me that there are cultural differences. But let's step back a little bit and look at it. I think we're all in agreement that there's such a thing as right and wrong. I mean, you raise children. I have a 22-year-old son. We teach our children the difference between right and wrong. We, in our lives and in our choices and our behavior, including in our cross-border collaboration, try to understand what's right, what's wrong, and how we proceed and how we do things. Well, we're talking about behavior. Before there's behavior, there's thought. So if there's such thing as right and wrong behavior, there's right and wrong thought. So I think wrong thinking, it becomes clear to everyone. You can see that it's illogical. You can see that it's counter to the facts. You can see that it's counter to experience. I'll give an example of what I think is wrong thinking. Wrong thinking is when people say, there are no differences between cultures. People are people. We all want the same things. That's very true at a very basic level. But once you get into the details of what cross-border teams do, how they communicate, how they make decisions, how they lead and want to be led, how do they interact with customers, what does a solution look like, how do we define a quality product? Well, folks, to answer those questions, it doesn't help to say people are people. Let's not talk about culture, because our experience and the facts tell us the opposite. There are differences between cultures. You don't have to be terribly arrogant to make the statement I just made there. There is such a thing as wrong thinking and right thinking. And wrong thinking is to say cultures are cultures. Let's not talk about it. We're all human beings. We all speak English. Let's just begin collaborating. Very wrong thinking.
I see, and I think I fully understand, John. These statements you make, are they only in regards to the USA and Germany, to their cross-border interaction? Or
No.
are your statements more universal? I think you mentioned other cultures during your speech.
Yeah. No, it's clear for me. And frankly, Christian, you have more international experience than I do. I'm deeply embedded in the Germany USA space. You've worked in every region of the world at this point in very serious and very deep ways. So it's a rhetorical question on your part. And it's important for your listeners to know that John Magee is not making these statements only in respect to Germany and the USA. Those are great examples and they're not bad. The USA is the largest economy in the world. Germany is the fourth largest economy in the world with only 80 million people. But these basic concepts that I'm getting across are true for any combination of cultures or countries who are collaborating within cross-border teams.
John, thank you again. I'm just thinking of our international listeners and viewers. We have loads of them and the number is growing. They'd love your excellent advice. Thank you.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Christian.